"Why is my picture in your wallet?" the maid's toddler asked. The billionaire turned pale. "Before we begin, if you love stories about broken people finding their way back to love, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's begin." The dining room at Highgate glittered like something out of a magazine. Crystal candle light. Vanessa's parents seated like royalty at the far end of the table, judging every fork. Daniel Cole picked up. He hated these dinners. He hated the way Vanessa smiled with her mouth, but not her eyes when her mother spoke. He hated pretending this was the life he wanted. Then small feet slapped against the marble floor. "Lily." Sophia's voice panicked from the hallway. "Lily, come back here. Too late." The 3-year-old barreled straight for Daniel's chair, climbed his leg like it was a jungle gym, and settled herself onto his lap before anyone could stop her. "Lie Grace Rays," Sophia gasped, arriving breathless in the doorway, her housekeeper's apron still on. "I am so sorry, Mr. Cole." "It's fine," Daniel said, and meant it, which surprised him. Lily wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking at his jacket pocket where the corner of his wallet peeked out. "Money," she announced and yanked it free before he could react. Vanessa's mother let out a scandalized little laugh. Vanessa's smile went thin and brittle. "Lily, no," Sophia rushed forward. But Lily had already flipped it open, already found the photograph tucked behind his card, the one he never let anyone see, the one he'd carried so long the edges had gone soft as cloth. She held it up to the candle light, studying it with a serious concentration only a toddler can manage. Then she turned to Daniel, tilted her head, and asked the question that stopped his heart. "Why is my picture in your wallet?" The table went silent. Daniel looked at the photograph in his daughter's in Lily's small hand, looked at the woman in it, young, laughing sunlight in her hair, his face drained of every drop of color. Vanessa's voice cut through the silence like glass breaking. "Whose picture is that, really?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because for the first time in 6 years, Daniel Cole had absolutely no idea how to control what happened next. "Stick with me. This one gets deep. Let's go back 2 months to where it all started." Highgate Estate sat on 11 acres above the Long Island Sound. All gray stone and glass. The kind of house that photographed beautifully and felt like nothing lived inside it. Daniel Cole had built Cole Industries into a logistics empire worth more than some country's GDP by the time he was 32. He had a house full of art he didn't look at, and a fiancée his board adored, and a schedule that started at 5 and ended whenever his body finally gave out. He had not laughed, really laughed, in longer than he could remember. The staff had theories about why something had happened to him once before the money, before the name Cole meant anything beyond his father's company. Nobody knew the specifics. Margaret, who had run the household for 11 years, knew more than she said, which was itself a kind of answer. Sophia Rays had been hired 6 months earlier, recommended by an agency that specialized in discretion. She was quiet, competent, and kept to herself in a way the other staff found almost aggressive. She brought her daughter to work in the mornings before daycare picked her up, a small logistical mercy Margaret had arranged without asking Daniel Unk's permission, correctly guessing he wouldn't notice or care. She was wrong about the second part. Daniel noticed everything about the little girl who didn't seem to understand that he was supposed to be frightening. "Hi," Lily said to him the first week, planted in the hallway outside his study like she owned it. She was 2.5 then, sturdy and unbothered, hair in 2 crooked puffs her mother had clearly done in a hurry. Daniel had looked down at her the way he looked at unexpected line items in a budget. "Hello, you have a sad face," she informed him and toddled off before he could respond. He'd stood there in the hallway of his own 11,000 QFT house, feeling for reasons he refused to examine. Unsteady, it became a pattern. Lily talked to him through his study door when Sophia wasn't looking. She left things. A rock she decided was pretty. A drawing of what might have been a dog or might have been a house. A single sock she insisted was his, even though it clearly wasn't. He found himself some nights standing in the doorway of his study, looking at a crayon drawing taped crookedly to his desk lamp, unable to throw it away, unable to explain to himself why. Sophia apologized for her daughter constantly. "She doesn't understand boundaries yet," she said one morning, scooping Lily up from where she'd wedged herself into Daniel's home office chair. "I'm working on it." "Don't," Daniel said before he could stop himself. "It's fine." Sophia looked at him a beat too long, something unreadable crossing her face, and then she was gone. Lily on her hip, and Daniel stood there wondering what exactly he'd just given away. There was something about Sophia that unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. Not attraction, or not only that, something closer to recognition, a word on the tip of his tongue he couldn't retrieve. He caught himself watching the line of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. He caught himself listening for her voice down the hall. He told himself it meant nothing. He was engaged. Vanessa Kane was smart, ambitious, photographed well beside him at every gala his board required him to attend. Their marriage would be by every metric that mattered to the people who mattered a success. He did not examine too closely why that thought made his chest feel hollow. It was Margaret who gave him the first thread to pull, though she hadn't meant to. He'd mentioned offhand that Lily's mother seemed sharper than most of the household staff. A passing observation, nothing more. Margaret had been folding linens in the hallway and her hands had gone still. Sophia's had a hard road, Margaret said carefully. Lost her older sister a few years back, never really talks about it. What was her name? The sister Isabel. Margaret's eyes flicked to him, then away too fast. Isabel Reyes. Daniel felt something shift in his chest, small and strange, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. He couldn't have said why the name unsettled him. He filed it away and told himself it was nothing. He should have known better. Nothing in his life was ever nothing. 2 weeks later, Daniel came home earlier than expected from a canceled meeting and found his study door ajar. He pushed it open, already irritated, expecting a cleaning oversight. Instead, he found Sophia standing at his desk, frozen, the bottom drawer, the one he kept locked. The one that held nothing anyone should have cared about except him, open in front of her. She held a photograph in her hand. His photograph, the one he'd hidden away years ago and never let anyone see. "What are you doing?" Daniel said, and his voice came out harder than he meant it to, harder than he'd used with anyone in this house in months. Sophia's head snapped up. Something flashed across her face. Not guilt, exactly. Fear. Old fear, the kind that lived in a person's bones long after the danger had passed. "I'm sorry," she said, setting the photograph down too carefully like it might break. The drawer was already open. I wasn't trying to. That drawer is locked. I know it was open. I swear to you, Mr. Cole, I wasn't looking for anything. She stopped herself. You just what? Sophia's eyes met his. And for one unguarded second, Daniel saw something in them he couldn't name. Recognition. The same word that had been sitting on the tip of his tongue for 6 months. "Nothing," she said. "It won't happen again." She left before he could ask another question, and Daniel stood alone in his study, staring at the drawer at the photograph still lying face up where she'd left it. He picked it up, studied the woman in it the way he had 1,000 times before in hotel rooms, on planes, in the dead of night when the house was too quiet. He had never told anyone who she was. He had never told anyone she existed at all. So why, he thought, hands unsteady, had his housekeeper looked at her like she was looking into a mirror? If you were Daniel in this moment, would you have asked her outright or waited to see what she'd say on her own? Let me know below and let's keep going. He didn't ask. Not yet. Something in him, the same instinct that had built an empire out of knowing when to hold back, told him to wait, to watch, to let the thread unspool on its own before he tugged at it, and lost whatever truth was still attached. Instead, the strange, careful Thor between them continued, mostly because Lily refused to let it do anything else. She had taken to greeting Daniel every morning with a full report of her day's plans delivered with the gravity of a general briefing troops. "Today I am going to find a frog," she told him one Tuesday, utterly serious, hands on her hips, "and then I am going to name him Gerald." A reasonable plan, Daniel said, and was startled to hear something in his own voice he hadn't heard in years. Warmth, ease. Sophia, hovering in the doorway with an armful of folded towels, caught his eye and almost smiled before she remembered herself and looked away. It was in these small, unguarded moments that Daniel began to understand something was happening to him that he had no name for and no defense against. He found reasons to be home earlier. He found himself listening for the particular rhythm of small feet on marble floors. He found one evening that he had spent 45 minutes helping Lily build a tower out of his financial reports before he registered what he was doing with his time. He told himself again that it meant nothing. Vanessa noticed before he did. She arrived unannounced on a Saturday 3 weeks before their engagement party, ostensibly to discuss seating charts. Daniel found her in the kitchen instead, standing very still, watching through the window as Lily helped Sophia hang laundry in the side yard, shrieking with laughter every time a sheet billowed over her head. "Cute," Vanessa said in a voice that suggested the opposite. You seem very invested in the help's domestic situation. Lee's a kid. Kids are loud. I don't mind it, Em. Vanessa turned from the window, studying him with the particular attention she usually reserved for competitors. You've been different lately, Daniel. Softer. I can't decide if I like it. He didn't answer. He didn't trust what would come out if he did. That was the first clue Vanessa had, that something in her carefully arranged future was under threat, and Vanessa Kane did not tolerate threats to her arrangements. Within the week, Sophia was informed without explanation that her responsibilities were being reassigned to the guest house, effective immediately. It came from Vanessa's assistant, framed as a staffing optimization, delivered with the bloodless efficiency of someone executing an order rather than making a decision. Sophia didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing rarely changed anything for people like her. She packed up her small station in the main house, gathered Lily's crayons and half-finished drawings from the corner of the kitchen where she'd been allowed to color, and said nothing. But Lily noticed the distance, even if the adults thought they'd hidden it. "Well, why don't we see Daniel anymore?" she asked her mother one night, sitting cross-legged on the guest house bed while Sophia braided her hair for the morning. Sophia's hands stilled. "His busy baby. He's not busy. He's sad. I can tell." Sophia didn't answer that. She couldn't, not without saying more than she'd promised herself she ever would. Daniel, for his part, told himself the distance was for the best. He was engaged. He had a merger closing in 6 weeks that required every ounce of his attention. He did not have room in his life for whatever this feeling was. This unfamiliar ache that showed up whenever he passed the empty spot by the kitchen window where Lily used to color. He pressed Margaret again one evening, more directly this time. "Tell me about Isabel Reyes." Margaret's face went carefully blank in the way it only did when she was protecting someone. "Not my story to tell, Mr. Cole. Margaret, I mean it. Ask Sophia if you need to know so badly. It's hers to give, not mine." He didn't ask Sophia, not directly. But he found himself one Sunday afternoon walking the long way past the guest house instead of taking his usual path to the garages. And he told himself it was a coincidence when he saw Lily through the open window, sitting on the floor with a show box of old photographs spread around her, helping Sophia sort through them. Lily held one up to the light, studying it the way she studied everything with total unblinking focus. Then she trotted straight out the guest house door across the lawn, photograph clutched in her small fist, and did not stop until she reached Daniel. "Look," she said, holding it up proudly. "It's you, but not you." Daniel took the photograph on autopilot, expecting a stranger, expecting nothing. His whole body went cold. It was the same photograph, the one from his locked drawer, the one of the laughing young woman with sunlight in her hair, except this one had been folded and unfolded so many times the crease ran straight through the middle of her face. He looked from the photograph in his hand to the little girl in front of him, close enough now that he could see it, the thing he'd been too afraid to let himself see for 6 months. Her eyes. Lily had her mother's dark hair. Her mother's stubborn chin, but her eyes, the shape of them, the particular gray-green color, belonged to someone else entirely. "They belonged to him, Lily." Sophia's voice came from the guest house doorway, and it wasn't gentle this time. It was raw, terrified, the voice of someone watching her whole carefully built life come apart in real time. "Lily, baby, come back here right now." But it was too late. Daniel was already looking up from the photograph to Sophia's face. Already doing math he hadn't let himself do in 6 years. Already understanding with a certainty that felt like the floor dropping out from under him exactly why the woman in his wallet photograph had looked so impossibly, achingly familiar the very first time he'd seen his housekeeper's face. "Sophia," he said, and his voice came out as a stranger's. "Who is Lily's father? This is where everything changes. If you've ever had a secret catch up to you when you least expected it, I want to hear about it in the comments." Now, part 3. Sophia didn't answer right away. She crossed the lawn instead, scooped Lily up onto her hip with hands that visibly shook and stood there holding her daughter like a shield. "Please," she said, not in front of her. Daniel's jaw worked. Every instinct he'd spent a decade sharpening. Read the room, control the narrative, never let anyone see you rattled. Screamed at him to walk away, to handle this later, calmly, like a problem to be managed. He ignored every one of them. 10 years ago, he said, low and unsteady. "I worked construction on the Hendricks site under a different name because my father would have destroyed anyone I actually cared about if he'd known who I was really seeing. There was a girl, 19. She worked the coffee cart outside the site. She had a little sister who used to bring her lunch. Sophia's arms tightened around Lily. She disappeared, Daniel continued. And now his voice was breaking open in a way it hadn't in years, maybe ever. No note, no explanation. I looked for her for 2 years before I gave up and let my father put a ring on my finger's future instead of a person in my heart. Tell me I'm wrong, Sophia. You're not wrong, Sophia whispered. The silence after that stretched long enough that even Lily, sensing the weight of it, went still against her mother's shoulder. Your father found me, Sophia said finally, and the words came out like something she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in the dark and never once said aloud. 2 weeks after you told me you loved me, he came to the coffee cart himself. He told me exactly who you really were, exactly what my life would look like if I stayed. The lawyers, the press, the way people like his family destroy people like mine for sport. He offered me money to disappear, enough to take care of my mother's medical bills. Enough to get my little sister through school. Her voice cracked. I didn't take it because I wanted to leave you, Daniel. I took it because I was 20 years old and terrified, and I believed him when he said he'd ruin my whole family if I didn't. You could have told me. He said if I told you, the deal was off and he'd find another way to make sure I disappeared that wasn't nearly as kind. Tears were running freely down her face now. I didn't even know I was pregnant yet. I found out 3 weeks after I left. By then, I'd already changed my number, already moved states, already told myself the safest thing I could ever do for that baby was make sure your father never ever found out she existed. Daniel looked at Lily at his daughter, 3 years old, watching the 2 adults she loved most with wide, frightened eyes, and felt something in his chest cave in. 6 years, he said. You let me grieve you for 6 years. I grieved you every single day. Sophia said, you don't get to be the only one who lost something. He didn't have an answer for that. There wasn't one. Betrayal and grief and something that felt terrifyingly like love were all fighting for space in his chest at once, and he didn't know which one was going to win. His voice failed him. I need time. I need to think, Daniel. But he was already walking away, back toward the main house, back toward the life he'd built on top of a grief he now understood he'd never actually needed to carry alone. He didn't see Vanessa standing in the shadow of the garden hedge, close enough to have heard every word. She'd come looking for him about the caterer's final menu. She left with something infinitely more useful. Vanessa Kane did not believe in wasted information. She stood there a long moment after Daniel disappeared into the house, turning the conversation over in her mind, calculating, not shock, not hurt, but leverage. A 3-year-old with cold eyes, a housekeeper with a decade-old secret, a fiancé who'd looked for one unguarded moment, more alive than she'd ever seen him. This was not a crisis, Vanessa decided, smoothing her expression back into something pleasant as she walked toward the house. This was an opportunity. She just had to decide how to spend it. I know that ending hurts, but it's about to get worse before it gets better. Stick around for part 4. The story broke Vanessa's way 3 days later, though not to the press, not yet. That would have been too crude, too traceable back to her. Instead, she went straight to Daniel, cornering him in his own study with the same calm precision she'd have used to close a difficult acquisition. I know about the housekeeper, she said. No preamble. I know about the little girl. I know your father paid her off 10 years ago, and I know exactly what happens to Coal Industries' stock price if this becomes public before our wedding instead of after. Daniel stared at her, something cold settling in his stomach. You're threatening me. I'm protecting us. Vanessa's smile didn't reach her eyes. The board finds out you have an illegitimate child with a household staff 2 weeks before we announce our engagement publicly. And it's not a scandal, Daniel. It's a story. The kind tabloids run for months, unless you handle it quietly. Sophia and the girl leave, generous severance, an NDA somewhere far from Greenwich. This gets buried before it ever has to be dug up. She's my daughter. She's a liability, Vanessa said, and something in her flat certainty made Daniel understand with sudden and total clarity exactly what kind of marriage he'd been about to walk into. You can be angry about that later. Right now, you need to be smart. Daniel didn't answer her. He walked out of the study instead, past Margaret, who caught his arm in the hallway with more force than her age suggested she had. Whatever you're about to do, she said quietly, do it because it's right, not because it's easy. What do you know about this? Margaret's eyes were wet. I knew Isabel, Sophia's sister. I recommended Sophia for this position because I recognized her the moment she walked in for the interview, recognized her sister's face in hers. I've watched you carry a photograph of a girl you wouldn't talk about for 6 years. Daniel, and I put 2 and 2 together long before that little girl ever pulled your wallet out at dinner. I should have told you the truth the day I hired her. I was a coward. Don't be one, too. That night, Daniel went looking for the answers Margaret's confession had opened up and found them in his father's old private files, records he'd never had reason to look through until now. A wire transfer, a signed non-disclosure agreement with Sophia's name on it, dated the exact week she'd vanished from his life, proof in his father's own cold handwriting of exactly what had been done and to whom. He sat with those documents until 3:00 in the morning. And when the sun came up, Daniel Cole understood finally who he did not want to become. He went to find Sophia to tell her so. She was already gone. The guest house was empty. Lily's small shoes missing from beside the door. The show box of photographs nowhere in sight. A note sat on the kitchen counter in Sophia's careful handwriting. I won't make you choose between your company and us. You shouldn't have to. I'm sorry. S. Daniel's assistant, when pressed, admitted Sophia had asked for a ride to the train station an hour earlier. Daniel didn't wait for his driver. He took his own car, breaking every speed limit between Highgate and the station. His hands shaking on the wheel in a way they hadn't since the day his father had first told him Sophia was gone for good. He didn't know, tearing down the Merritt Parkway with the sun barely up, whether he was going to make it in time. He didn't know, if he did, whether there'd be anything left to say that could undo 6 years of silence. He only knew he wasn't going to lose her them a second time without fighting for it with everything he had. If you've ever had to choose between the safe thing and the right thing, this next part is for you. Let's finish this story. The 8:15 to Grand Central was already boarding when Daniel skidded into the station parking lot, left his car running crooked across 2 spaces and ran. He found her on the platform, Lily on her hip, a single suitcase at her feet, everything she owned in the world reduced to what she could carry alone. Sophia. She turned, and the look on her face when she saw him, hope and terror braided together so tightly neither one could win, nearly broke him. Daniel, please don't make this harder than it already is. I read the file, he said, breathless, not caring who on the platform was listening. I found my father's records, the NDA, the wire transfer, everything he did to you. His voice cracked. I am so sorry. I should have looked harder 10 years ago. I should have never let anyone convince me you would leave me without a reason. Daniel, Vanessa will destroy your company if this gets out before you're ready. I don't care. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Daniel Cole meant something with his whole chest instead of half of it. I have spent 6 years building an empire I don't even like. Engaged to a woman who just told me our daughter was a liability to manage. I am done being smart. If smart means losing you both again. Lily, watching this exchange with the solemn attention only a 3-year-old can bring to adult chaos, reached her small hand toward him. Are you my daddy? She asked plainly, the way only a child could ask the question that had taken the 2 adults in front of her 3 days to work up the courage to say out loud. Daniel's eyes filled. He looked at Sophia silently, asking permission for the only thing he'd ever wanted more urgently in his life. Sophia nodded, tears sliding freely down her face. Yeah, baby, Daniel said, taking Lily's small hand in his. I think I am. The fallout when it came fast, but not the way Vanessa had planned. Daniel called an emergency board meeting the following week, laid the truth out himself before anyone else could control the narrative, and watched Vanessa's leverage evaporate the moment there was nothing left to threaten him with. Her engagement ended within the hour. Her attempt to frame Sophia as a gold-digging opportunist, falling apart the instant Margaret produced Robert Cole's decade-old paper trail, proving exactly who had paid whom to disappear. The board, to Daniel's genuine surprise, cared far less about scandal than his father ever had. Stock dipped for 3 days and recovered within the month. It turned out the world was kinder to honesty than his father's generation had ever believed possible. The harder work happened in private. Daniel and Sophia sitting across from each other most evenings for weeks, working through 6 years of grief and silence and misunderstanding that couldn't be fixed with a single apology at a train station. However sincere, they didn't rush it. They let it be as slow and unglamorous and real as it needed to be. Margaret cried the day Daniel formally changed Lily's birth certificate. Not from sadness, from relief. 6 years overdue. 6 months later, the household gathered in the garden at Highgate for something small and unpolished. No wedding planner, no press, no seating chart negotiated by anyone but the people who actually loved each other. Just Margaret and the staff who'd watched this family come apart and stitch itself back together. And Lily in a lopsided flower crown she'd insisted on making herself. She ran the length o' the aisle before the ceremony even started, threw her arms around Daniel's legs, and announced to the entire assembled garden, "That's my daddy," with the same unshakable, matter-of-fact pride she brought to everything. Daniel picked her up, held her against his chest, and looked at Sophia walking toward him in the golden evening light. The same woman from the photograph he'd carried folded and faded for 6 years. Finally, impossibly real again in front of him. He didn't need the photograph in his wallet anymore. He had the real thing standing right in front of him for good this time. Sometimes the truth that scares us the most is the one that finally sets us free. If this story moved you, let me know which part hit hardest. And if you believe love finds its way back when it's meant to, drop a heart in the comments below.